Far more important than the small, careless historical errors scattered across the writings of Dawkins, Hitchens and Onfray are the significant misrepresentations of historical scholarship you'll find there. I'll offer just 3 examples. The first is one they're all guilty of. Several times in The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins gives the impression that Jesus' very existence is still a matter of dispute in historical scholarship. He writes, "It is even possible to mount a serious, though not widely supported, historical case that Jesus never lived at all." And having sown this seed of doubt in the reader's mind, he later uses expressions such as, "if he existed," or "whoever wrote his script if he didn't." Christopher Hitchens likewise speaks of the highly questionable existence of Jesus. And Michel Onfray goes further, saying, "Jesus' existence has not been historically established. We must leave it to lovers of impossible debates to decide on the question of Jesus' existence." These statements will seem utterly incredible to those who have dipped into historical Jesus studies. In fact, I read them out recently in a paper given to the Society for the Study of Early Christianity, part of Macquarie University's Ancient History Department. And the scholars and students in the room chuckled. And it wasn't the chuckling kind of audience. It is frankly laughable to suggest that even Jesus' existence is still a matter of dispute in scholarship. I know of no professional ancient historian or biblical historian in any university in the world who thinks Jesus' existence is still debatable. And just to check that it wasn't my own bias getting in the way, I recently asked 3 leading ancient historians if they knew of such a scholar. None did. Now, one of the 3 was Professor Graham Clark of the Australian National University. He is an eminent classicist and wrote the chapter on Christianity in volume 10 of the Cambridge Ancient History. He emailed back, "Frankly, I know of no ancient historian or biblical historian who would have a twinge of doubt about the existence of a Jesus Christ. The documentary evidence is simply overwhelming." If you're interested in the details of that documentary evidence, there are plenty of other videos and papers on this topic at publicchristianity.org. My point for now is that the new atheists have invented a scholarly debate that doesn't exist. All of which highlights something about the strategy of the new atheists, at least in historical matters. I can't tell if they do the same thing in other areas as well. They employ the arguments of marginal writers and present them to the public as part of the mainstream scholarly conversation. Now, I don't know if they do this deliberately, but they certainly do it. And Richard Dawkins proves the point. His one example of a serious historical case that Jesus never lived at all is one Professor G.A. Wells of the University of London, he tells us. What Richard Dawkins doesn't tell us is that George Wells is London University's Professor of German Language. Now, it's worth pausing to reflect on what Dawkins is doing here. He's co-opting a scholar from a completely unrelated discipline and using him to endorse something no scholar in the actual discipline would agree with. Imagine the response from Richard Dawkins if I were to argue at this point that it's possible to mount a serious scientific case that evolution by natural selection is false, and then cited a language professor as my authority. I suspect he would accuse me of intellectual dishonesty, or at least a gross ignorance of the field. So at this point I find myself asking, if in the one area I can check up on the new atheists, I find them significantly misrepresenting historical scholarship, how can I have confidence that they're not doing the same thing in the areas I can't easily verify, in philosophy, science, sociology, statistics, and so on? My final example of a significant historical misrepresentation in the new atheist literature comes from the pen of Michel Onfray. Bizarrely, he calls into question the crucifixion of Jesus. Another improbability, the crucifixion. History again bears witness. At that time, Jews were not crucified, but stoned to death. But let us concede that he was put on the cross. In that case, like all other such victims, he would have been left hanging there at the mercy of wild beasts. Then the remains were thrown into a common grave. In any case, there was no question of bodies being laid to rest in tombs. Fabrications. The claim that the crucified never received a proper burial is a simple exaggeration. There is very good first-century evidence in Philo and Josephus that some crucifixion victims, especially Jews, were buried. But more striking is the claim that Jesus' crucifixion itself is unlikely because Jews weren't crucified in this period, but stoned to death. This is an inexplicable blunder. Jews were amongst the most crucified people in antiquity. We know of 2,000 Jews crucified by Varus in 4 BC. Two more, named James and Simon, were crucified in the late 40s AD. And 500 a day were crucified during the siege of Jerusalem in AD 70. We even have evidence of Jews crucifying Jews. Alexander Janus, the ruler and high priest of Jerusalem, crucified 800 Pharisees in one day, and their families were made to watch. But the clearest evidence of Onfray's error is the discovery in 1968 of archaeological remains of a crucified man in a Jewish tomb. Inside the burial box, which was inscribed Jehoanan, John, they found a heel bone with an 11-centimetre nail still in place. It's taught us quite a bit about crucifixion, not least that Jews were certainly crucified in the first century, and some were properly buried as well. That a noted professor of philosophy like Michel Onfray can so patently misrepresent history in service of his beliefs is, I think, very telling. These are by no means the only historical errors and misrepresentations in the New Atheist literature. We might update this video from time to time, but here's the punchline for now. For all the learning and rhetorical brilliance of the New Atheists, their commentary on Jesus and the New Testament reminds me that dogmatic skepticism can be every bit as blind as religious dogmatism. In fact, they're the mirror image of each other. I can respect Richard Dawkins, the biologist, Christopher Hitchens, the literati, and Michel Onfray, the philosopher. But there's no doubt in my mind that when these authors range outside their specialty, they are more than capable of sloppy reporting of information and significant misrepresentation if it furthers the atheist cause. As I said earlier, I can't get the thought out of my head. If in the one area I can really check up on the New Atheists, I find them fudging facts and misrepresenting scholarship, how can I be confident they're not doing the same things in the areas I can't easily check, in their science, sociology, philosophy, statistics, and so on? Now, they might be accurate in these other fields, but I can't take them on trust. For me, that's a step of faith too far.